right. Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show. Please like, subscribe, and comment on YouTube so you can keep up with all of our great guests. As we have one today, we have Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. He's an NFL writer. How you doing today, Dan?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Of course. So we talked offline. We just talked about how hot it was in the DMV area. It's about 90. It's going to be 91 degrees today, 97 degrees tomorrow. Just a quick casual question for you, Dan. What's your favorite summer beverage to kind of take the edge off? It could be an iced tea if you don't drink alcohol. But I'm just kind of curious what you're into.
A lot of stuff. Big water drinker. I got a Liquid Death right here. It's just some great water. But if you want like a nice little cocktail, I'm a gin guy. So like a London Mule, which is like a Moscow Mule, but just a little gin in it with some ginger beer, some lime. Very refreshing.
That sounds delicious. I've never had a London Mule before. I'm a big Moscow Mule kind of guy, and the Irish Mule, get the whiskey as well. But that sounds delicious. Sounds awesome. Cool. So, Dan, obviously, we're here to talk about football, and we always like to introduce our guests to their background of introduce our listeners to the background of our guests. So, I'm just kind of curious. So, you are an NFL writer for 33rd team right now. I've seen some other articles for FTN, and you wrote for the Sharp Football Analysis as well. I'm just kind of curious, how did you get into the industry?
So I, studied communications in college, and then just coming out, wanted to do something in, in sports media. Mm-hmm. And so kind of just looking to find exactly where I fit in. And, the story I've told, and I've told this to Aaron Schatz, which I've, worked Football Outsiders on the Almanac, which is now the FTN Almanac, is, listening to the Bill Simmons podcast at the time. And Aaron Schatz came on, and just kind of the way he talked about football made sense to me in a way. So I kind of went into that rabbit hole a little bit. And, I don't come from a, football guy kind of background. Mm-hmm. I also don't come to this from like a, numbers guy background, like not a math guy who's like making models and anything, but just the way those two kind of married themselves into how he talked about it made sense to me. And that's kind of how I've gotten into this, in trying to marry all of these different things. And like, I feel like that's a way that explains the game, fairly well. And so, just kind of worked from there.
Absolutely. I feel like it's the future of the industry, right? I feel like people are getting more and more into the game, more and more into sports betting, more and more into fantasy and things like that. The numbers are so important. Everyone's trying to get that edge and just kind of looking at the game at a different level. So that's great. Speaking of Aaron, and speaking of the Sports Almanac, I noticed that for several years now, you've been adding to a FTN Sports Almanac. Is that part of Football Outsiders? It kind of evolved over time, or is that as a standalone company now?
Yeah. So everything is FTN now. Unfortunately, Football Outsiders no more. It was. Some crazy stuff going on with the actual company. So now Aaron is at FTN. Last year, when they were trying to figure out what to do with the Almanac, FTN was very kind to produce it, and then that's kind of just grown into they're the ones who produce the Almanac now. Yeah.
My apologies for that. But so with the FTN Almanac, I look at it has team projections, it has fantasy football statistics, it has DVOA. I'm just curious, like how much. I'm sure it's hours and hours and days of work. I'm just curious about that timeline process, like how much work you put into it. How do you even start something like that? Like, how did you get into that?
It's a lot. And I think that's the cool thing about the Almanac too, which I know there's more, season preview type of things that are, trying to come out, but I just kind of think the Almanac has always been the standard because of the amount of work and the amount of kind of care that goes into it. And I still think like the writing in there is first and foremost what's the best thing about it, because there are places where you can, get stats or projections or things, but the way each writer, I think, really focuses in on the teams that they're looking for. We bounce around a little bit depending, each year in which chapters we do. I did all of the NFC North for this year's upcoming Almanac, but it's really like we usually know what teams we're doing sometime in the off season, sometimes a little earlier, just to kind of get a heads up. So, you're from that time, you're really looking at what they're doing in free agency, looking at what they're doing in the draft. And then really it's, full speed ahead after the draft, because that's when you can really start knowing what this team is going to look like a little bit, what they're going to do. So you're going back, watching, what they did in the previous season, kind of projecting what they're going to be doing in the upcoming season. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. So it's about, 2 months of a lot of work. And I think it just comes out with an incredible product every year.
Absolutely. And I know you're probably in the midst of it right now. I'm just kind of curious, who do you think is the front runner in the NFC North? I mean, it's a very packed division, right? We have the Packers, we have the Vikings, we have the Bears, we have the Lions. It's stacked. So it's arguably one of the best in the league.
Yeah, this is definitely the most fun division probably that I could have been assigned, I think, because all 4 teams are really interesting in the sense that, we have the Lions and the Packers that should be at the top. And I think they're probably going to be neck and neck for, differing reasons of why they're each going to be good. But then you have, the Vikings, who have been good for a while and are completely pivoting into, a whole new kind of era with a quarterback. But I really like that coaching staff on both sides of the ball. So they'll be interesting. And then you just kind of have the Bears that are going to be a, complete unknown. You have Caleb Williams. You have arguably, and I think we say this in the chapter, the best supporting cast for a number 1 overall pick that, there's really ever been, at least in, modern history. And then, that defense really took a turn over the second half of last season, where it was like a top 5 unit. That's hard to sustain from year to year, especially the way they did it with turnovers. But yeah, every team in that division is going to be interesting, which is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the NFL season for sure. You also wrote a great article about the NFL salary cap and the boom of the salary, which I find super interesting, especially with the quarterback market. We talked about quarterbacks making $50 million per year. And my favorite piece about your article was the wide receivers, right? That's actually pretty pertinent to what we're looking at in DC. You talked about how the salary cap, in regard to these big contracts, they look big on paper, but in regard to salary cap allocation, it's pretty standard what we're seeing year over year, about like 18 to 19% of the overall cap. I don't want to speak for you, so I'll kind of throw that back to you in a moment. But I guess talk to me about the wide receiver situation, the salary cap, and maybe the growth of rookies. And then we'll eventually get to Brandon Aiyuk, and I'll ask a follow-up question about Brandon Aiyuk. So let's talk about the wide receiver cap right now.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I could probably nerd out for this for a while. So like, what you mentioned from the article that I just wrote this week is kind of, the Justin Jefferson contract is huge, right? And it's the biggest for a non-quarterback. But in terms of like percentage of the cap when it was signed, it's not a complete outlier. Like we've seen deals that were bigger. Tyreek Hill's deal was technically bigger at the time, but that was also because he signed it in the year after the salary cap dropped, following the 2020 COVID season. So salary cap was down in 2021 when he signed that deal. But, we have like the Larry Fitzgeralds and the Calvin Johnsons, they were all in around the same range as Jefferson. What is different now, I think, is the volume of receivers that are going to be making that type of money, because back then the Fitzgeralds, I think Jerry Rice, I have in that article, signed like a $26 million deal. And it was like the biggest, it still like stands as like the biggest deal against the cap at the time. So the volume is what's going to be interesting. So, and really going back to what this Jefferson contract is really interesting, is because it really stems back to like DeAndre Hopkins in like 2020 signed his extension with the Cardinals. And the way we talk about salary cap and the way we kind of talk about value of contracts is in new money. So Hopkins signed this deal that was like $56 or so like $1 million, or a little over that, over a 2-year extension. But he still had 3 years left on his deal in Arizona. So that was spread out a bunch. But the way everyone talked about it was about a $27.5 million average. But that was never really a real figure. And most teams didn't treat it as a real figure. But Devontae Adams, when he wanted a new contract with the Packers, saw that as a real figure and was like, I would like to top that. So that's where the negotiations kind of went wrong with Green Bay. So eventually he gets traded to the Raiders. They give him a deal that has a very backloaded last year, which again is not real, but the overall average then bumps it out. Same thing happened with Tyreek Hill. He saw that average when I would like that. he goes to Miami. They gave him a contract, a very big, unguaranteed final season of that contract. The thing about Jefferson is he's very young. This is a second contract, not a third contract like some of these guys. So this is a very real deal that paid him, $35 million throughout this entire contract. There's no fluff in this. So that is a lot of money committed to one player. And we are going to see now, we got a CeeDee Lamb coming up. We have a Jamar Chase coming up. So it's been a sizable shift in how we do pay receivers and how many of these receivers are going to be paid. And then, to go into kind of the Aiyuk thing a little bit is there have been teams that have been trying to stack up wide receivers. Obviously, there's more wide receivers on the field playing now than ever before. And we are just getting to a point where, having like two number ones, like a 1A and 1B, is a way to really just have an advantage on really every play. What we're seeing now is it's going to be tough to pay both of those guys at the same time. We saw in Cincinnati, if we go to T. Higgins, I think they were ready to do that. They were really prepared to have Burrow, Chase, and Higgins as the three guys they paid. They moved away from some veterans on the defense that could have been paid a little bit more. Like they didn't re-sign Jesse Bates. They moved on from some of their cornerbacks. They went really young there, really cheap. And they kind of bet on Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator, to kind of make the most of some of these young guys to make it work. And then Burrow gets hurt in the middle of last year, and the defense didn't really come around the way they thought. So I think they've kind of rethought their process a little bit, which is why I think we're in a stalemate a little bit for Higgins and getting that type of deal. I think it's going to be the same thing with Brandon Aiyuk, where they would love to do that. They have a quarterback on a seventh round rookie contract, but with his contract going to be coming up, and now you have Christian McCaffrey, who's the top paid running back. George Kittle is right now a top 3 tight end. Deebo Samuel is a borderline top 10 wide receiver by salary. So you can't pay anyone. So when we go to this wide receiver market, I think it's going to be the 1Bs on teams that have a 1A and also some of the mid-tier like wide receiver 2 guys are going to be the ones that are going to be pushed out a little bit. And I think that's where we're going to see most of the movement coming up. It's not going to be wide receivers are replaceable. We're going to move on from a Justin Jefferson because we think we can draft a wide receiver. No team is going to do that. Like, no, they're not. Cincinnati's not moving on from Jamar Chase and trying to draft another receiver to that. Like, that's never going to happen in the wide receiver market. But in the way where some of those mid-tier number ones, like the 1B options and the number 2s, I think that's where we're going to see, some of the you kind of got to figure out where the baseline is of how much you're going to extend to those type of guys.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've been reading up on this and learning about this for almost a couple of years now. It seems like there is that upper echelon of like awesome wide receivers, that top 3%, top 5%. They're going to work the top end of the market. They're going to continually to push the highest end of the salary cap. But there is rookies coming in every single year, wide receivers coming in better than ever. It's going to coming in as a cheaper workforce in regard to that 1B option or even that number 2 option to kind of supplement and kind of support that wide receiver 1, which I think is a great question to kind of throw over to you, right? So I guess, is that even – so it sounds like we're kind of on the same page, but I'm curious, is that poor salary cap allocation? Because right now here in D.C., we're talking about Brandon Aiyuk. There was a viral video, I'm sure you saw. Brandon Aiyuk was talking to Jaden Daniels, talking about, hey, I want to join the Commanders. They don't want me here. Help me out a little bit. Right now, Washington has Terry McLaurin for roughly around $20 million, maybe 24. I have the figure right in front of me. Jahan Dotson's still in a rookie contract with a potential 5th-year option coming up next year, which is going to be about $15 million. I guess, is it even feasible for Brandon Aiyuk to fit? And would that be like appropriate, smart salary cap allocation in your opinion? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one just because of how much they already have in receiver. And they are one of those teams that, did try to go and get that 1A, 1B type of option. That's kind of why they drafted Jahan Dotson where they did. And, I liked Jahan Dotson a lot during coming out of college. I thought he flashed really well during his rookie season. And going back, I was talking about, I wrote the Commander chapter in last year's Almanac and coming out and, just kind of digging through like all of the stuff. But of all the players I wrote about, like Jahan Dotson was kind of like one of the players I was most excited for in 2023. And then that just didn't really happen for, I think, a couple of different reasons. So I think it's going to be one of those where you're going to have to see where he is, and that is like I think he's going to probably be the priority, and if he has a good season, then you're probably going to extend him, because obviously you're not going to be fitting 3 wide receivers at that type of salary on the cap. But Washington right now, they have the cap space, so I wouldn't be surprised if, because of some of the moves that they have made to kind of get some of the contracts off the books, especially on defense. But this is going to be a thing where the Brandon Aiyuk thing is tricky, because I don't think San Francisco necessarily wants to trade him. And obviously they have the 5th-year option this year. They have the franchise tag for the following season. So this could still be, 2 years away from really being decided in San Francisco, because I think if you place him on the tag, that's still a manageable number for them. Where you can
have the number in front of you? By any chance? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So let's see. I can pull up. It'll be a little more than whatever it is right now. So T. Higgins is, 21.8 right now is the 2024 figure. So, I think it bumps up a little bit because of all of the other wide receiver deals that have been signed. But again, if you still have Higgins for, or Aiyuk for 25, I think you can, potentially fit that for a year as you kind of figure it out. And then maybe by that point, San Francisco is doing something else with Deebo Samuel. There's a lot of things that can still be, figured out down the line there. So as much as Brandon Aiyuk wants to get paid right now, I'm not sure if this is necessarily needs to be something from the San Francisco standpoint that needs to be dealt with like right away, because they still have 2 years of team control at least.
That's a great point. I didn't necessarily think of it that direction. I guess one more, because we are a commander-centric podcast. Would you pursue Brandon Aiyuk? Would you throw a 2nd-round pick and a 4th-round pick and add him to a room with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson? Or do you think it's like, we also have Luke McCaffrey in the pipeline as well. I don't know if you're too familiar with him, but he's having a pretty good camp so far. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Aiyuk is like you could probably say borderline top 10 wide receiver. Just the way he gets open it's going to work in any offense. So yeah, I would pursue that. If I was pretty much any team, I think I would be calling San Francisco and be like, what would it take to do this? Whether San Francisco is, willing to pull the trigger for something that's, only a 2nd-round pick, I don't know if that's worth it for them to lose that type of guy for, the type of draft capital that isn't really going to replace him in that sense. And especially in a season right now where you still have that 7th-round rookie contract for a while. So you're in no rush to be doing something for this year. So, but yeah, if I'm any other team, like I'm calling John Lynch probably every day and just being like, hey, man, is he still available? I'll make another offer. I'm just, checking in every day.
Gotcha. But ultimately, you think he's going to stay in San Francisco, from in your opinion?
I would think so, and at least for this year. And then I think maybe after this year, they could, potentially figure out whether they're going to move Deebo or not. And I think that could potentially be something that's more likely because of, Deebo's age and what he does now. The cool thing about San Francisco, and I've written about this a lot, is, on any play, we talk a lot about versatility and, guys who can move around. But for San Francisco, that's every player, which what makes that offense special. So at any time, Deebo can be lined up in the backfield. McCaffrey can be in the slot. Kittle can be in the slot or, in the backfield. So I think Deebo does play his role there. But I think just as a wide receiver and in the passing game, and if they're trying to expand that more, I think Aiyuk is a more valuable player there. I think that is going to be a decision San Francisco is going to have to make. It's probably going to be one or the other, and they probably have at least half of this season to figure that out.
I agree. I think of the two, they value Brandon Aiyuk more as more of a pure wide receiver, and I think Deebo Samuel's skill set is kind of redundant of Christian McCaffrey's in regard to the running and the passing coming out of the backfield, so I can see that as well. All right, let's transition a little bit. So you also wrote a great article about quarterbacks, and I find it very interesting. Well, I guess this is part of your salary cap conversation. So upcoming, we have Tua Tagovailoa, we have spelled his name, Jordan Love and Dak Prescott coming out. I'm kind of curious. in regard to what do you think is coming down the pike for them? $50 million contracts. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, would you pay that right now? Is there any way to work around it to fit into the cap? Like, what are your thoughts on those big three?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think Tua and Love are in a different conversation than I think Dak is. Dak is in this whole other world by himself where like Dak Prescott, he's going to be hitting unrestricted free agency at the end of this year. He can't be tagged, can't be traded. I mean, unless he, gives the okay. But again, only this year left on his contract. And then he's open to the market. And that could be, we could probably list 16 teams right now that would be willing to give Dak Prescott like $60 million. So he is going to like reset this market because his circumstances are so much different than everyone else. And that's going to be a thing to watch because Dallas really, I think, backed themselves into a corner with how long they waited to make this happen. And the fact that he is going to hit unrestricted free agency if they don't come to an extension, but Prescott has no rush to sign an extension because he is going to, be able to hit the open market, which we do not see a caliber of Dak Prescott for the quarterback hit the open market. Like teams went crazy when Derek Carr hit the free agency market. And like that, Derek Carr, and we said at the time, like quarterbacks like Derek Carr don't hit free agency.
I remember that. I did.
And, that he, turned out to be Derek Carr, no matter if you signed him. So, that's a completely different thing. For Love and Tua, it's interesting because, Jordan Love. So I wrote the Packers chapter for the Almanac this year, and going back and kind of watching Jordan Love and what they were able to transition into, because I think we kind of forget because of what Jordan Love ended up being. The first half of the season was kind of rough. And absolutely. I think they made a pivot somewhere in there and kind of gave Jordan Love a little bit more, leeway in the offense, let him, Matt LaFleur kind of dared him to let it rip a little bit. He was kind of thinking a little too much. And I think when you kind of saw what he was able to do unleashed a lot, there was there were some special throws in there. So I would be okay signing him to, whatever type of deal they would be into. Tua is interesting because, and with Love, you're so cheap and young everywhere else on the offense. You're not paying a wide receiver yet. You have like 4, maybe 5 good ones who are all still on rookie deals. So you have the ability to kind of build around that quarterback contract. With Tua, it's interesting because you have the Tyreek Hill contract. You now have Jalen Waddle. But I think the thing about Tua is I don't think he gets enough credit generally for how he is part of what makes that offense go. Because the way he is quickly able to get rid of the ball, I think really covers up the offensive line that has not been good for the past couple of years. And they had to pivot to this outside running game, which was incredible last year. But that was also so the offensive line didn't have to just block straight ahead. It was getting those guys out on the edge. So I think there is a lot that goes into making Miami what it is specifically. And I think Tua does play a part in that. The problem is when there's like one thing that goes wrong, they don't really have a straight drop back game. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the thing they've figured out this offseason of what they need to kind of add to that offense, because each offseason now with Mike McDaniel, they've kind of, figured out a new thing that they're going to unveil. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have a little more of an answer from the start for this straight drop back game. So, with Tua, it's tough because I think he is very much a part of why that offense can go. It's also going to be hard to pay Tua and Tyreek and Jalen Waddle and some of the other guys they have on defense. And I think we kind of saw this. They couldn't sign Christian Wilkins this year. So they're already kind of making some things there. So with Tua, it's a sense where I think they can win with him. And I think sometimes it's win because of what he affords them, being able to kind of run that offense in a way. Like, I think if you put like a Jared Goff or even like a Brock Purdy in that offense with that offensive line, they're not getting the ball out quite as quickly
Absolutely.
as they can. That offense doesn't work as well. And I think they have to find another way to kind of get around some of that. So I agree with that. But I think, if there's a Dak Prescott available, and he does a lot of stuff that could really make that Miami offense, like that is the Matthew Stafford to the Rams type of thing. So it's hard to really, focus on like, okay, if we get Dak, like, sure. But I think every team is probably like thinking that also.
Yeah.
So I think there is a way where you can get to on the books and it's not guaranteed much past like 4 or 5 years. And I think there's a way that works. And I think Miami can still play to the way they want to and construct an offense in the way they want to with that. So it's tough, but I like Tua a lot. I think he brings a lot of things to the Dolphins that I think he doesn't get enough credit for generally. But yeah, we're talking about a lot of quarterback money, which is kind of what shapes the entire conversation.
No, you nailed it. I think Tua's game is predicated off of timing and accuracy, and I think he fits the system very well, especially in those like Kyle Shanahan, like that mold of offense. I think he fits pretty well there. But it was very interesting. Dak Prescott's a great summer home, great twilight of the career to move down to Miami, kind of and lead that offense. At the end of his career there, I love that. 2 more questions for you. We can start wrapping it up. So speaking of the Cowboys, we're in the NFC East. They have an interesting dilemma upcoming. We keep talking about the salary cap. Now they're pinched. So we have 3 big names on, that coming up in contract years: CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott. And you're talking about Prescott walking away with $60 million and resetting the market. So I'm kind of curious, like, how would you prioritize signing these guys? It's like, it sounds like maybe letting Dak Prescott walk and keeping Lamb and Micah for the price of, 2 for the price of 1. Does that make any sense? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would have prioritized them yesterday and like the day before. So I wrote an article about this also. I just don't know what their game plan has been for this past offseason. Because I think we've seen just kind of all across the league, the earlier you sign some of these guys, especially when they are stars, the better it's going to be. You have more time to stretch out whatever new money you're giving them, because usually there's still years left on the current deal that you could kind of push some of that money forward, but you're also stretching it out into later years. So the amount of time you can pay this contract, and also you're getting ahead of some of these contracts. Like if the Cowboys had signed CeeDee Lamb before Justin Jefferson, the $35 million a year probably isn't in the conversation, right? They're probably around like the 32 or so that AJ Brown just signed for, which is fine. But CeeDee Lamb can look at 35 and go, yeah, I can do that. My numbers are comparable. I don't think CeeDee Lamb is as good as
I agree with both of that. I agree with that.
I'm not sure if CeeDee Lamb thinks that. His agents probably don't think that, but they can use that number now because we're going to see that. The same thing with Jamar Chase. I think you're going to want to get in before Jamar Chase does too, because if he beats the Jefferson money, CeeDee Lamb's going to ask for more than that. So the earlier you get in on some of these deals, it's going to be the same thing for Parsons. Parsons going to be looking at, we'll see whether he's actually looking at the Nick Bosa number, which is what Jefferson was actually looking at, because he didn't reset the wide receiver market. He wanted to reset the non-quarterback market. But if Parsons is going to be looking at the Justin Jefferson number and being like, I want to reset the non-quarterback market.
Wow. Okay.
So these are places that you kind of, the more information you get, and, Jerry Jones has said this, like they wanted to see some leaves fall, and like the tree fell. It wasn't leaves. Like they are really waiting on a lot of things to happen in front of them that is only making their job harder to get these guys signed in a way that is going to make it financially viable to keep all of these guys. And maybe they don't want to, but then you kind of, if we go back to Prescott, like I would expect Lamb and Parsons eventually do get done. Like they're going to be Cowboys. It would be crazy to let those guys go. But if you don't want to be paying the $60 million for, a quarterback, and you've kind of backed yourself into a corner there, then you're staring at like what the Vikings were this past offseason, where it's okay, we don't want to pay Cousins what he's going to get, but then you're sitting with no backup plan, right? So you're signing Sam Darnold for $10 million. You're hoping that a guy is going to fall to you in the draft. And luckily for Minnesota, it worked out. Didn't have to. Like I know there were reports that they wanted to trade up for Drake May, and they would have jumped into the top 3 if they could have. But then you have teams sitting in the top three who also are probably there because they need a quarterback. And that's kind of what the Vikings ran into also. So luckily for them, JJ McCarthy fell to them. But if you're the Cowboys right now, the way this team is constructed, this team's not going to be bad, right? It's still probably going to be a playoff team.
Absolutely.
So you're not sitting in a place where you have the draft capital that you're going to be able to do to trade up for one of these teams. And it's probably not going to be a team in the top 5 willing to drop back into like the mid 20s either. So you're putting yourself in a really difficult spot to get to wherever the next quarterback is going to be if you decide right now that you don't want Prescott, because there has been no plan in place to replace him. I mean, you have Trey Lance, which is fine. Like, I am not of the opinion that Trey Lance is bad, but because I think he showed some good things. Even the year he played, he had that one game in a monsoon, and then he broke his ankle the next game. So, like, we don't really have a lot to say that Trey Lance was actually bad. And his rookie year when he came in for a little bit, like, he was on par in efficiency with Jimmy Garoppolo, doing it in a very different way. But with Trey Lance, you're kind of in the Jordan Love situation and a year behind the Jordan Love situation where he's already at the end of his rookie deal. So if you do want him, you do have to figure out what he is going to be worth on an extension now, because there's nothing left on that rookie deal. So they've kind of painted themselves into a corner, like, in multiple ways. So the Cowboys have been just the most baffling team in terms of how they've approached this offseason. And I really don't understand it. I don't get their reasoning at all. And I think they could have helped themselves a lot by even one of these deals getting signed earlier would have helped them, because then that would have lowered a cap hit for whoever they signed. They could have brought in a free agent, because they didn't sign anyone externally either, because they kept talking about, well, we don't really have the money to do it. Well, that's because you have the cap space all blocked off by the final years of these deals.
Exactly. The Cowboys are notorious for that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Exactly.
I can't explain what the Cowboys are doing in a rational way of why they've been doing it, but they're going to be an interesting offseason team, because there's a lot of things going to be coming up, and there's only a couple ways that can go. It's either they're going to sign these guys for way more than they probably could have, like, in this offseason, or like this whole thing's going to blow up, and it's fascinating either way.
Absolutely. Just like if I were to make a prediction, I feel like Dak Prescott will be a free agent and go somewhere else, because I feel like Jerry Jones appreciates Dak Prescott but isn't in love with him. So that's one thing there. And then in regard to CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons, Jerry Jones is also a businessman. He knows those guys are highly marketable. They're great players, top 5 of their positions of both of them. So I think he can easily keep them and figure that out in regard to that. Do you have time for one more question, or are you kind of pressed time? All right, cool. So let's kind of wrap it up. It's a Commanders-centric podcast. In Washington, we've had so many changes this offseason. I love to kind of dipstick with people and kind of dipstick with people nationally and kind of get your viewpoint on the team. We've had new coaching changes. We had front office changes. We've had Jaden Daniels come to DC. I'm just kind of curious, what are your projections for the year for Washington? Do you see big things for them? Are you excited about any particular player? What are your overall thoughts on them in the NFC East?
Yeah, I think, I think the defense will be fine, right? Because they brought in enough competency there on that side. And I think Dan Quinn, especially, if he was still doing what he was doing, like with, the Seahawks and some of his like other stops, I would have kind of questioned that, and even like what he was doing defensively with the Falcons. But I think he really like flipped a switch with what he was doing defensively with Dallas. So I think there are going to be some cool things there. So I think that's going to be fine. I'm fascinated by the offense, right? Because there are a lot of good things going on. I was a supporter of Cliff Kingsbury early. I am not totally sure if how he wants to run an offense is going to mesh well with what Washington does, right? I think the run game is going to be awesome, right? So the best thing he did was really get the traditional run game with running backs and the quarterback run game. That was the best stuff he did with Kyler Murray. That was where he was the most creative also. So I think that with Jaden Daniels is going to be great. Yeah. My hesitation there is, man, Jaden Daniels has never seen a tackle that he did not want to take. And that worries me a little bit, because when you have guys like a Kyler Murray or a Lamar Jackson, I think their special trait, like they are great runners, but their special trait is that their spatial awareness
exactly
is incredible.
presence.
So
Yeah,
they're
sure.
either they know exactly what angle to take to get out of bounds, or
Mm-hmm.
they know where a guy is and they're going to slide before they take a
Mm-hmm.
really big hit, way more often than not. Jaden Daniels is just kind of running into guys. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a sustainable way to run an offense, especially one that's probably going to be pretty quarterback run based.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my hesitation a little bit there. The other thing is, creating spacing over the middle of the field, which is not a thing that Cliff Kingsbury was great at. Wasn't necessarily a thing Jaden Daniels was great at in college either. So, if that's going to be that's the most valuable area of the field. You're not really hitting the intermediate middle. You're kind of missing out a lot on what you can be doing there. I mean, that's basically what the entire Shanahan tree is based on.
Absolutely.
It's hitting these crossers and routes where you can keep moving in the intermediate middle of the field. So I think that is going to be, it's an interesting, just kind of to mashup of what the quarterback skill and what the offensive structure is going to look like. And I am interested to see what it is if Cliff kind of evolved a little bit and he's going to come out creative. And even in Arizona, he came out usually as a pitcher who was throwing 103, but then by the third inning, his arm got tired and he couldn't throw a strike anymore. And that was kind of what the offensive kind of the carousel in Arizona was during his tenure there. So I think there will be some cool stuff if they can sustain it, if he can continue to be creative in a passing game that allows some of the spacing and stuff. I don't just want to see, as cool as a contested go ball to Terry McLaurin is going to be with Jaden Daniels' arm and some of the deep accuracy that he had. I don't want to see that 5 times a game. And I think that's kind of the danger Washington is getting themselves in with how they've kind of constructed the offense. So I just, if there's a little more creativity, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but I'm a little cautious about whether that's going to be the case or not.
I love it. I was going to tell you to be 100% candid. That's what I was trying to sneak in there because we've had Dean Brugler on, we've had Matt Miller on, we've had these conversations, and I'd say that Cliff Kingsbury is probably the most polarizing of all the coaches that we have here in DC. He's very intriguing, very interesting, but I think people feel that he can't finish off a season. He starts off pretty hot at the beginning of the year, calling great offensive plays, but then by week 7, week 8, he gets figured out. So hopefully in an offensive coordinator role, he's not necessarily burnt out as opposed to the head coach. He can potentially balance it out, and we'll see. That's the $1 million question for Washington this year. We'll wrap it up with this one. We ask every guest this question, if you don't mind, and be 100% blunt with us. The over-under is 6.5 for the Washington Commanders in DC, in Vegas. What are your thoughts on that over-under and why?
Yeah, I'd probably lean just slightly under, but
okay.
Even if that's 6, I think that's going to be okay. And there's a way in Washington where the 6 it's a promising 6. That's certainly possible too. So I don't think just because of that, but you still have the Cowboys and the Eagles, who I think are going to be significantly better in the division. I think the schedule might be a little tough if I am coming to this.
I think they play the AFC North.
Pretty easy, actually.
Yeah, isn't that bad? It's 15th in the league or something. Isn't that bad?
Yeah, schedule is fairly easy. But so I'd sit around 6 is probably where I would think. So just because of 6.5, I would say under. But I don't think it's going to be one of those where they look completely lost and stuff. So it could be a promising 6, but still leave under.
Absolutely. Those guys in Vegas know exactly what they're doing. That 6.5 numbers are pretty solid, right? So that's right there. Awesome. So Dan, you've been great, man. I really appreciate you guys. Everyone that's watching the show, definitely check out Dan and all his at Dan Pizzuta at Twitter on X, and write articles for 33rd Team. Great stuff. Dan, thank you for everything. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.